And welcome to the Planter Podcast, where we talk about veggie gardening and try to make it easier for you to grow food. I'm one of your hosts, Peter Keefe, and I garden in a community garden in Connecticut.
I'm Mylan Turner. I'm a home gardener here in Atlanta, Georgia.
And I'm Erin Thompson, and I'm a market gardener as well as a home gardener in Waterloo, Ontario.
All right, here we are. It's fall. It's October 1st, actually. Um, and one of the things that we do this time of year is making sure all of the stuff that we grew actually lasts. Harvesting and preserving. So that's the topic for today. Um, let's start with the first step, harvesting. Any tips or tricks on harvesting? Um, I
Just
guess.
keep up.
Yeah.
That's honestly, for me, that tends to be one of the biggest challenges, especially with the home garden, because I spend all day harvesting for work. And then it's like you come home and it's like, oh, do I really want to pick more cherry tomatoes? But it's like you
Mhm.
have to kind of make that, if you want to get the most out of your plants, somehow you have to get out there, even if it's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day, and just pick what's ready, because that's kind of, I think, the biggest area where people lose harvest. And it's kind of sad, to spend all that time tending your garden and weeding and taking care of the plants to make it to the final stretch and then lose half of your harvest just because, you couldn't manage to get out there in time. So just really stay on top of it, picking things early. And that'll help, so they don't rot or, get bug bitten or that kind of thing.
That's pretty late in the season. So you might be harvesting a little bit of tomatoes still from the summer. I know that I'm harvesting just a few every week. Still getting those tomatillos. Uh, and then all the fall plants that I planted, the bok choy, the radishes, those are starting to come in. What are you harvesting right now?
Is that for me?
Either.
Well, I'll start, and then Mylan, if you want to jump in. So, again, market garden, we've still got almost everything producing for the most part. Like some things are really starting to wind down, like the zucchini and the beans and that sort of thing. But just we do so many successions that it just kind of keeps on going, and we use tunnels. At home, it's kind of the same thing. Like tomatoes are, there's still some out there. They're starting to dwindle. Watermelon. I shared that picture with you guys earlier. I'm just getting my first watermelons. They really chugged all season long, so they're finally at the point now where they're ready to pick. And then I've got the last dregs of zucchini and those kinds of things. So just sort of at that transition point where we're about to start the fall veggies and lose sight of the summer veggies.
Yeah, so my summer veggies wrapped up pretty early because I started early and I did not do a second round of some of the things that I normally would, like determinate tomatoes. So right now I've got peppers galore. I just shared a picture today. I've got a random ghost pepper plant that I planted just kind of for fun. And this thing is out producing everything. And I have no need, no use for that many ghost peppers. But
Just snack on them. That's
Next
simple.
podcast, Mila eats ghost peppers.
no, 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 no. I made one jar of salsa with one pepper and I roasted everything. And I thought we were going to have to evacuate. It started wafting through the house, and I was like, "Uh oh, I might be in trouble." But yeah, so my fall, I wrapped up most of my summer harvest pretty early, using some of the preserving techniques that we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah, and like for video viewers, we actually have some of our harvest in the background. So this is the very first cabbage that I've ever been able to grow successfully. And we were just talking before the podcast how hard it is to get cabbage to grow that doesn't have bugs all over it. And I grew my cabbage in two areas, one with bug netting and one without. And the one without the bug netting looks like Swiss cheese, and this stuff looks perfect. So, now I know for next year, plant all of my cole crops under bug netting just to keep all those bugs away. Aaron, what do you got in the background of yours?
So these are some of my favorite things to grow in the home garden. So I got some beefsteak, their side, beefsteak tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, tomatillos, and bell peppers. So yeah, those are kind of the classics, quintessential. Again, my home garden space is pretty confined, so I have to kind of keep, be sort of constrained in terms of what I put in. And that's why I don't typically grow brassicas in my home garden. We have like a little side garden, and that's where I have done them in the past, but they just take up so much space, and they are, it takes so long to get a harvest. So the tomatoes and the peppers and the tomatillos kind of make more sense for me space wise. You just get those huge yields, which is fun come harvest time.
So, Aaron, you mentioned earlier how crucial the timing is. Looking at your tomatoes, they look picture perfect. Can you kind of give us some ideas on when to pick them?
Sure. So actually, tomatoes are really handy in that you can pick them when they first start blushing. I think it's called the breaker stage. So basically, as soon as they start to show hints of color and turning from green, you can actually pick them and take them off and just put them, on your kitchen counter, and they will continue to ripen. Don't put them in the fridge because that will, severely slow the ripening process and it'll change the texture. So just put them on the kitchen counter and they'll continue to ripen until they hit that picture perfect stage. And that's helpful for a few reasons. One is, again, if you're picking ahead, you don't fall behind, right? So if you're always picking them a little bit early, you give yourself a bit of wiggle room. It helps as well with, pest pressure and disease pressure if you're just getting them off quicker before, the bugs say like, oh, that looks like a nice tomato. And you just have that kind of constant stream of harvest. If you don't want to do that, and the other thing I should say is there really isn't any difference. Like some people think, oh, if you leave the tomatoes on the vine, it'll taste different. That's really not the case. As long as you let them get that first blush of color, they will still have a nice tomato flavor once they ripen on the counter. So don't worry too much about, a big flavor difference. And then, otherwise, if you're just looking at the ripe tomatoes, you want them to have just that little bit of give, but not be super mushy, right? So it wouldn't be rock hard and it wouldn't be mushy. It would just have a little bit of give when you squeeze it. And that's actually super helpful for green tomatoes too, which I tried, I think, a green zebra or something like that. And it's really hard to tell when they're ripe. So you just give it that little, squeeze test and that's your indicator. So.
Yeah, that's kind of what I found it with harvesting early also helped me with some of the bug pressure. In July, the stink bugs hit here really, really hard, and anything that gets close to fully maturing, they just come and they suck the juice out and they mar the vegetables pretty badly. But I found, like you said, if we get them just when they start to blush, that the bugs seem to take to them a little bit less. So I found that helped get me to harvest, although it takes just a little bit longer for them to ripen indoors, but as much better than the bugs getting all of them.
And how do you feel flavor wise? Like I personally haven't detected any difference. I think there's actually been research, but what do you feel like you're?
I didn't notice a difference at all. And even when I did, for some, I know this is a cardinal sin to most, but any of the tomatoes that I was going to either roast or I know that's going in like a salsa, once I do get them ready, if I've got an abundance of them, I'll put a few in the fridge. And then when it's time to use them for cooking or canning, I'll take them out and let them get to like room temp and then process them. But even with that, I didn't notice, any taste difference. And by roasting or pureeing or putting them in a blender, I'm not really too concerned about texture there. So I know a lot of people don't like that idea, but I found, like you said, that helps preserve them before you preserve them for later.
No, that totally makes sense. And that's been my experience as well is, if you're just going to end up cooking them down, it doesn't really hurt to put them in the fridge. And I mean, if it's the difference between that and them going, completely rotten, may as well put them in the fridge. What
Which
about
can happen really quickly indoors. You talk about, that timing that doesn't change. Once you get them indoors, and when they're right, they're right.
mhm.
So you have to use it if it's sitting out on the counter, or like I said, put them in the fridge. And I've also seen people will vacuum core them and go ahead and freeze them if you're
Mhm.
going to, if you know that you're going to roast or cook later. So that I did not do that this year, but that's going to be on the agenda next year.
Nice.
Oh, that's a good segue into preserving specifically for tomatoes. Coring and freezing them, that's something I do like every year just because lots of times, you don't get them all in at the same time. You don't want to like throw them in a boiling pot of water to blanch them and um, get the skins off. So I just sometimes will take, okay, I only got 5 tomatoes and don't have anything to do with them, so I'll core them, stick them in a freezer bag, and then toss them in the freezer. And then later in the fall, when I'm making a chili or something, I'll take them out and tastes fine to me, especially if you're cooking it with something else. I haven't noticed a difference. Yeah.
Do you find it easy to remove the skins after they've been frozen?
Yeah, so after they've been frozen, I just take them out of the freezer bag, throw them in a colander, and then run some water over them, and then the skins will come right off. Yeah, and then you can use them cooking whatever dish you're making. Um, I do have on the screen. Planter does have a little bit about harvesting and storage in case you're looking for a specific plant, how to harvest it. This is broccoli, one of the most difficult plants to grow in my opinion, and also figuring out when to harvest it is incredibly tricky. If you harvest too early, you're missing out on a big harvest. If you harvest too late, maybe those buds have already started opening up. So, but you can still eat it at that point. So, as I found out, not really a fall like this time of year crop. Maybe in a little bit. Mylan, are you growing a second batch of broccoli?
Yeah, I actually am. This is the easier time for us to grow them because in the spring we get those early heat waves, which causes them to bolt really early. Us and the insect pressure comes in way sooner in the spring. So we plant in fall with the hopes that there should be far fewer caterpillars this time of year, especially if we can get a little chill. But yeah, significantly less than in the spring. As a matter of fact, I actually don't think I'll try many brassicas in the spring from here on. There's just been too hard. Like you said, that broccoli was the hardest one for you. Cabbage is by far the hardest one for me because you'll have this plant growing and it looks perfect from the outside. And the 2 years previously that I've tried it, I've cut it open to just seeing the most disgusting bug pressure from the inside, and that just, you talk about breaking your heart. That'll do it.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
But
that's a
fingers crossed. I've got some I just planted out this previous weekend, and so hopefully this window will be the one for cabbage.
And that's such a bummer too, because with a lot of crops like tomatoes or peppers, to a certain extent, if they have a blemish or a bug bite, it's like, well, you can just chop that off and, 9 times out of 10, you're good to go. The inside's fine, right? So it's not like you have to throw out, your entire crop. But cabbage is kind of one of those ones where like when the bugs go at it, they really go at it and there's not a lot to salvage. But I think that's important though. Like as a home gardener, it's pretty, I'm not going to say rare, but like it's not maybe always the norm that you're going to get that grocery store level of size or blemish free or things like that. And that's just the way it rolls. And I mean, I kind of like it. You get the weird knobbly peppers or the eggplant that grows a nose or something, and I think it's kind of cool. So yeah, so don't expect, perfection when you're harvesting. Like sometimes you might have to cut around a bug bite, but it's totally fine unless, the whole thing is infested.
Yeah.
I'll say that's one of the things that has shifted my mindset the most from growing my own stuff at home is, like you said, I had this picture in my mind of what stuff is supposed to look like based off of what's in the grocery store, and then you kind of start to learn that what's on the shelves is a lot about marketability. What looks good in photos, or what that picture perfect vegetable, and then you start growing them and you see, hey, stuff happens. Someone gets dropped as you're putting it in a basket, and now it's got a bruise on it. And when you've got limited supply, you realize it's just a bruise, or like you said, it's just a bug bite. I can cut out even less than a tenth of the vegetable, and the rest, the other 90%, is still great. And that was a big eye opener for me.
Yeah, I think peppers are probably the best example of this. And it's like a funky shaped pepper. You don't see them that often in the grocery store, but you see them all the time in the garden.
Yeah, they're like
Yeah.
UFOs.
Yeah.
I sent an eggplant to market a few weeks ago. It hit the ground and then it grew like a donut shape, and nobody bought it. So I ended up taking it home.
And it's a perfectly good plant, a good
Mhm.
good eggplant. There's a company, I forget, I can't think of the name of it right now, but they sell kind of those, you know,
Yeah.
one-off vegetables that are perfectly fine. They just don't meet grocery store standards, and that's something I think we need to, as a society, need to look at a little bit differently. There's so much food waste and so many people in need that we can't be in position of throwing something away because it doesn't look perfect.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about Misfit Market, not a sponsor, but
Yeah, that is it.
yeah. I've I've got a few friends who order from there and they seem to like it. So
So speaking of which, have either of you ever tried to donate produce to your local food banks or soup kitchens? I'm just curious. I've heard a bit about it, and we sort of have our own outlets through the market garden. But I'm curious, as home gardeners, if you've ever tried to do that and what the experience was.
yeah, last year I had so many green beans, I didn't know what to do with them. So, I brought a few bags over to the local soup kitchen, and I I hope they went to good use. I don't know. It's a lot of work to process all those green beans though, so
Mhm.
I don't know what they did with them.
So in my case this year, what I did was we had what's called a community fridge, and it's a community initiative where there is a fridge that's stored at either a place of business or church or something like that, and whoever is in need can come and pick up items that need to be either refrigerated or shelf stable. And so one of the things I had a ton of this year was tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and eggplant. And what I did was take my extras to the community fridge. And my hope was that those are the kind of things that a lot of people in need don't have access to if they're not able to go to the grocery store. The majority of the stuff is going to be either already cooked and prepared or canned goods. So my hope was by providing some fresh, homegrown, organic vegetables that would give people some access to stuff that they might not be able to get. And when we dropped them off, it was really touching. They were very, very well received. Some stuff, like eggplant, might not be accessible for everybody, but the tomatoes and peppers and the cucumbers, that's if you're open to it, that's stuff that can be eaten with zero processing. And it was really, really touching to know that it was going to people who could appreciate it, and were in a position of need. And that's something that I like to be able to do a lot more in the future.
That's awesome. That's really amazing. And it's sometimes as gardeners, like we put so much pressure on ourselves to like, oh, I got to preserve this, I got to freeze it and can it. And, I don't want to lose anything. And it's like, you get so much satisfaction from sharing it, whether it's with your friends or your family or your coworkers or, the local food bank. It's just so rewarding. And I feel like there's it's interesting. There's almost like a gardening community. Like you almost start like trading off things too, or it's like, oh, here's some tomatoes. And then, 2 weeks later, it's like someone's brought in fresh salsa. It's really nice. So, it's so rewarding. Like if you feel like you're overwhelmed with produce, it's like, instead of just, eating cherry tomatoes every single day of the week, just find somewhere to give it away. And it's just really satisfying and rewarding.
Yeah, growing at a community garden, I encounter this a lot where like my garden neighbor will be like, "Oh, I've got way too much butternut squash," and I didn't grow any butternut squash this year, so she gave me one of hers, and I was like, "Well, do you want some tomatillos? I got way too many tomatillos." So it's a great way to, especially at a community garden, to get rid of your surplus and get some other variety in your diet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do the same. There's a small handful of people that have home gardens here in my neighborhood, and a couple of my neighbors are like myself and have gardens actually in the front yard. So we talk about, hey, what are you growing? What variety? And we have done some trades that way, much like what you mentioned, Peter. But the other thing that we do is our neighborhood is one of those that's kind of a transitional neighborhood in ages, I'll say. And so we have quite a few seniors that have been here 40, 50 years, and we've gotten to know them, right? And with them being, members of the community, one of the things that we like to do is put together baskets and harvest stuff and drop it off at their door. And that's another one that just was really, really touching to see, the looks on their faces when you're dropping off fresh homegrown stuff, especially in an
That's
area
really
like
nice.
mine where it can be challenging to get, vegetables and fresh stuff if you don't have transportation and, things like that.
Yep. So do we want to move on to, we talked about harvesting a lot and ways to get rid of excess harvest, but let's say, uh, you grew this stuff. You want to keep a lot of it, or maybe you want to enjoy some of it later in the year, especially in the middle of the winter when, um, you know, you're snowed in and everything is sad and you can't garden. You want to enjoy some of that nice harvest from the summer. So how do you do that? And there's a few ways: canning, freezing, pickling, fermenting. I have not done the last, but I've done the first three. So, what do you want to start with? Maybe canning.
For sure. I'm also going to add dehydrating, and I
Oh
want to ask
yes,
you guys about freeze drying too. So let's throw that one on the list.
freeze drying. Okay, so I counted maybe six different ways, um, and then the good old just eat it real fast before it spoils. But
That one's my favorite. It's less work.
yep, yep.
You know what though? There, like, it's kind of funny, like, eat it really fast, but there is actually a technique to that in a way. I think my biggest tip for that is cook it when you have time, not when you need it. So, like, a really good example of that was I had all these kind of random leftover veggies in the fridge, including the donut eggplant. And I was like, okay, I want to stir fry them, but just, never got around to it, never got around to it. Weeknights are busy. So after breakfast this past weekend, when I already was like in the mode of cooking, it's like, okay, I'm going to take all these veggies out. I'm going to chop them all up and I'm going to stir fry them. And then we've just been eating that as like a side dish. So that, to me, doing that really helps because, you know, you don't always get the choice of exactly what ingredients you have on hand. So you can't maybe frame an entire, weeknight dinner around it. But if you just take a bit of time on the weekend and say, okay, I've had this, and this, what can I cook out of it? And then, it's easier to eat it once it's already cooked. So
At first, I thought you were gonna say that you had eggplant, like an omelet, eggplant pizza. I was like, that maybe that would work. I don't
Yeah.
know. I've never tried it. Yeah, I've
We can
definitely
try
found
to do
that
that too.
too.
That's the other tip is just cram veggies and everything. It's like, oh, fried eggs, omelet.
Yep, yep. That's like the pizza I made yesterday. It just had a bunch of shishito peppers on top because that's what I have a lot of, and they actually they do really well on a pizza if you're
Did
thinking about
you
it.
did you convince your kids to eat that?
Nope,
Nope.
nope.
They pick all the shishitos off.
That was just Daddy's pizza, so
Aw.
they had to eat their plain old cheese. So yeah,
Well, I'll send you some of these ghost peppers if you want a ghost pepper pizza.
yeah. No thanks.
Yeah, that might be one that's hard to share, Mylan. You might struggle a little bit with that one.
I've
It's
seen a
true.
lot
I
of
don't even want them.
a lot of people bring those in for coworkers, and they just sit there, or someone might take them, but they're
Yeah,
in for it.
somebody suggested that. I was like, I don't know. That sounds like you might get a visit from HR. Who bought the
If they're
ghost peppers?
clearly labeled, I think you're fine.
Yeah,
Warning.
yeah, exactly. So let's get into canning. What has been you all's experience with canning?
I personally have not done a lot of canning. Like I do, the refrigerator pickles kind of thing in the brine, but I haven't
Mm.
done either water bath canning or pressure canning. I kind of know, the technique behind it. And I would really like to try it. But again, it's just like, setting aside that dedicated time, and gathering all the materials and sterilizing and yeah. So what about you guys?
For me, this is probably my least favorite method of preserving because it takes a lot of work, at least compared to freezing, where you can just throw it in the freezer. We have a extra freezer in the basement, so we've got a lot of freezer space. For canning, you got to get the big old pot of water boiling. You got to sterilize all of the jars. You've got to make sure you have enough fresh lids. But I do can occasionally. So like jellies and jams, I'll can those. Also have tried canning hot peppers at one point, Mylan. But they're too spicy even after I canned them, so they're just still sitting there. Um, yeah, so that's about the extent of my canning experience. When it comes to the staples from my garden, like tomatoes, I'll just freeze those instead.
So last year I experimented with refrigerator canning for the first time, and that went pretty well. So
Mhm.
naturally, this year I progressed to water bath canning, and I agree with you to a certain extent. It is a lot of work and it's extremely intimidating, but it's really rewarding when all the
Mhm.
work is done, right? When you're able to have, a month later, 2 months later, you're still able to eat something that you grew, you harvested, you processed, and you preserved. It just takes it to a different level. But yes, you're completely right. It
It's like a
is.
whole evening process. Yeah.
Yes, it's one of those. I think we've talked before. I do it at night when everything is done because a big vat of boiling water
Yeah.
when it's already 100 degrees outside just isn't the funnest way to spend the evening. But I did do uh, water bath pickles, salsa, and pickled peppers this year.
Did you heat the pickles or are they cold?
So the very first batch I did was heated, and that was so. Two things about that one. Again, working in the evening and a little
Hmm.
bit tired, I botched the recipe on that one and ended up making a bread and butter pickle, which still good. It just wasn't what I had a taste for. And that one, those were boiled. So when you, the difference is it's all about if you're going for that crispier type
Yep.
pickle and you do the boiling, they do get a little bit softer, and that's
Yeah,
just going to be a personal preference
I
thing. It
actually
doesn't
came
bother me.
so I did some pickles. Sorry to interrupt. I did some pickles this year, and I did not heat them up. I did the the cold refrigerator pickles. I did half sours and dill, and I found out that the trick to the crunch is in the variety of pickle cucumber that you grow, and
Okay.
also you can buy these calcium chloride granules that will make them crunchier.
That's what they
Um,
call the pickle crisp, right?
yep, yep.
Yeah.
So I actually ordered some of that from Amazon, and Amazon shipped me a whole case instead of the one. So I gifted those to my neighbors. Because you only need like a teaspoon for every jar. I'm never gonna run out. Um, yeah. So if you don't know, look those up. Pickle crisp, whatever. I don't know. I can't remember what it's called, but definitely check that out.
Yeah, so I haven't tried that. I saw that in my research. I will be completely honest. I was extremely intimidated by the process, by the thought of long-term preservation, because you hear all the horror stories about bacteria and stuff like that. So what I did was got get the ball canning guide, and
Hmm.
I followed that to the letter.
Hmm.
I measured everything precisely, made sure. So, a couple things that you want to really keep in mind is most of those will use vinegar. You have to be sure that you've got the 5% vinegar. And there seemed to be something different in some of the grocery stores. People were saying that they were only seeing 3% and 4% vinegar. So, be mindful of that. The water to vinegar ratio is really important, and the salt ratio to the weight of what you're preserving is really important. So I had all the measuring stuff out, I had the scales out, and I was a mad scientist in the kitchen because I just didn't want to,
Yep.
risk anything. And that's, I'll get more comfortable as time goes on, but I wanted to just do everything to by textbook this year, and everything was great. I did follow all the steps, like you said, sanitizing the jars. I had the pressure lid, the popping lids, and that was one of those things. The very first batch I took out the bath, and was kind of letting them rest on the counter, and I start hearing this little tink, 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 and I was like, "Uh oh, is it supposed to do?" Well, that's what I learned. I learned to celebrate it for the second batch, but the very first one, I was like, "Is that sealing or is that loosening?" And so after a quick Google search, it said that was a good sound. So then I really learned to appreciate that little tink every time. Um, and that for future batches, I really have learned to enjoy that.
So, would you ever consider trying pressure canning for low acid foods? So for anyone listening, the higher acid foods, I think the turning point is 4.6. Double check that, but I think it's about 4.6. So, anything below that, I believe, needs to be pressure canned, as opposed to hot water bath canned. And there's kind of a higher risk of getting that sort of contamination and spoilage. So would you try the pressure canning or?
Yeah, that so not this year though. That's the next year. I'll try to advance something each year, but even then, I'm going to cheat and get the electric pressure canner, instead of the big full blown. I'm not too worried about the pressure cooker itself. It's just I don't like having to heat up the stove. Like I said, when it's already so hot, and I just don't have a better environment for it. So a small electric pressure canner is on my wish list for next year.
Nice. We'll put it in our gift guide. What about you,
That's a good
Peter?
idea.
Is that something you would attempt?
I've briefly read about it, but like myelin, it does intimidate me, so I have not done pressure canning yet.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think I would want someone experienced. I think that would be my line, is if I knew someone who was doing it and I could kind of shadow them, then I would feel a little more comfortable.
So, and to that point, right, with the internet, there are lots of resources out there. there are things you really want to look for is either look for a guide like the Ball Canning Guide. They've been doing it for 100 years, and you just follow that to the letter. If not them, you want to look at your local extension offices. They publish a lot of material that is as good as it gets. It's well researched. It's got the backing of either the local university or your county extension office. And then there's the National Center for Home Food Preservation. They've published recipes that have been tried and repeated over and over again. So if you don't have anybody personally, those are just a couple resources that are safe to use.
Yep. The internet's a great thing. YouTube University is what I would go for learning. Um, so I think we've covered canning. Freezing. How about freezing? This is my favorite method. How about you guys? Aaron, you like freezing?
Oh, absolutely. I haven't tried it with tomatoes, although I have heard that you can. One of my favorite things to freeze is peppers. Like ever since I found out that you can freeze peppers, it's like all the peppers get frozen. So with bell peppers, you can just chop them or slice them however you would normally use them and put them in a freezer bag, and then they're ready to go for like fajitas, chili. It is so incredibly handy. So that's my go-to. And then for smaller peppers, hot peppers, you have the option. You can chop them up if that's how you prefer, or you can even, if you're crunched for time, I've thrown them in whole and then just let them defrost slightly and then slice them, and it works great. So yeah, freezing is a go-to. Some veggies they do recommend that you blanch before you freeze. I don't really, bother with that. It's like, if it's something I can chuck in the freezer, I'll do it. Otherwise, I'll try to find a different way.
I just did peppers, and also onions freeze very well. You don't need to blanch them. And I made fajita bags, so I just tossed some peppers and some onions in a bag, so it's perfectly ready. I just will throw it on the skillet next time I need to make fajitas. I do actually go into blanching. So squashes, all those extra zucchinis and squashes that you get, they do need blanching. And trust me, they do not taste good if you don't. Uh, I usually make like an afternoon out of it to blanch a whole bunch of squash and stick it in the freezer, and then that also gets turned into usually like a taco, basically filler, because it doesn't have much flavor. Mylan, how about you?
I have done freezing, and I have one of the vacuum sealers. So that's what I'll do is I'll take, like I mentioned, this year for whatever reason I just didn't do it, but in years past I've done the coring and the tomatoes, and then like you do mentioned the hot peppers, so like jalapenos, I like those frozen, and banana peppers freeze as well. So sometimes I'll pickle those, sometimes I'll just keep those frozen, and then like I said, they're during the winter where like you said you're kind of you're searching for vegetables and stuff to just kind of change up fajitas or to throw in a chili or a soup or something like that, and being able to have access to where you can just grab some of those and throw them in, it helps make some of those dishes, which let's be honest, they can feel a little boring at times, having those vegetables that aren't accessible in the grocery store that time of year really really make a difference.
Mhm. There's a couple other interesting things I've tried and learned with freezing. So one is grating. So with zucchini, when I have an excess, I mean, the only natural thing to do is to make zucchini bread, but then there's only so much zucchini bread that one person can enjoy at one time. So I've tried just shredding the zucchini and freezing that and then cooking with it, and that seemed to work really well. So I think, again, the common theme here with freezing is, you're going to have to do some kind of cooking afterwards. Like, it's not going to necessarily, with fruit, it's a bit of a different bag sort of, but with the veggies, especially, like you're gonna wind up doing some cooking in the end. And then the other tip is, if you're not sure whether something will freeze well, I would say just look it up, because you might be surprised. There's been things I didn't grow them, but limes. Apparently, you can freeze whole limes. I had a big bag of limes. Some of them were just starting to, you know, get concerning. So it's like, oh, you can throw them in the freezer and then pull them out. Same thing with garlic. Some people get into like mincing the garlic and putting it in the ice cube trays. But if you're pressed for time, you can theoretically just throw the whole head of garlic in and then take it out. It's obviously not as convenient after the fact because you haven't done the work ahead of time. But if it's a choice point between that or just completely losing it, just try it because you might be surprised what you can actually freeze.
You just brought up garlic, and that reminds me that we forgot the onions and garlic preserving method, where you just dry them out and let them sit in your basement for a few months. So, have either of you done that? Because I do that every year now, and
Yeah, like you mean just curing them for long-term
curing
storage?
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's shocking how long they last. Like it's weird. Grocery store garlic just sprouts like
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks after you buy it. But garlic that you've cured yourself, like I've had it over a year as long as you keep it cool and dark and not too humid. It just seems to last forever.
I think that was the key word for me, not too humid. It's very hard to have that right environment, at least here. So I am going to try my hand at growing onion and garlic for the first time this year. So I'll be bugging you for some tips on preserving that next year.
Yeah, and I think so. Like what I do for onions after you harvest them, the trick is to let them dry out for a long time, weeks. So I just put them in a shelf in my shed, and I brought a box fan out there, and I put it on a timer. So like every 30 minutes, it would go on for a few minutes, and get some good airflow over the onions. And then I did this new method where you can actually tie them up using the end of the onion. You can tie them onto a string, and then I just am hanging them from the ceiling joists in my basement, where hopefully it's cool enough and not humid. So
All right, well, we're going to put you under pressure and you're going to have to record that on video for us next time.
yeah,
Well, what
just
you need to
volunteer
do is braid it. Then it'll be next level.
I braided the garlic, so
Did you
yeah,
really?
yeah.
That's
I
awesome.
tried. I tried. Yeah. I had a good friend in middle school who taught me how to braid hair, so I was like, okay, I'll just same thing, right?
Nice.
Yeah. Um, all right. So I before we move on, I did look up University of Minnesota Extension Office. It does say that besides onions, leeks, and peppers, everything needs to be blanched. Which I don't know if I agree with that because I throw tomatoes in the freezer without blanching and they seem just fine.
Yep.
Um, so your mileage might vary. Maybe it depends how long you keep them in the freezer. Um, yeah.
So you said, what was the list that?
Onions, leeks, and peppers.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think the everybody's still on the fence of like tomatoes, but I think we've seen enough. It's all about, what you're using them for. If you're throwing them in a
Hmm.
stew, if you're putting them in a crock pot or a pressure cooker, which a lot of the winter dishes involve, I think that takes care of it.
Yeah. And a lot of it might also have to do with your type of freezer. So I've got a deep freezer that doesn't have any auto defrost, so the temperature is always cold, and so that keeps it very stable. If you got an auto defrost freezer where it warms it up to get rid of the ice, that might also cause some issues with storing them for a long time. All right. Um, Pickling? Did we?
We kind of touched on that with
Yeah.
the canning, but again, it's just, like we said, make sure you're following a reputable
Hmm.
recipe. Your pH level is what's going to be most important. Sticking with the 5% vinegar is going to be most important with that. Um,
One question I have for you: did you use special pickling salt?
I did just because that's what was, recommended. I
Hmm.
don't even remember. I think if I remember right, the difference is there's a calcifying agent in, I guess, the
The regulars.
standard salt, and
Yeah.
it's not in the pickling salt, and that was the primary difference from what I remember.
I think it makes it cloudy.
Yep,
I've never
yep.
been able to find that in my local grocery store, so I just use regular salt. Um,
Mhm.
So
Seems to work.
silly me being naive to it in the very beginning, I just thought it was going to make everything taste like pickles, and that's not the case.
Hmm. Well, and there's something if you are doing pickles for storage, I think is it you can't use iodized salt, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah,
I use sea salt, so perhaps that's the reason my pickles taste better this year. Last year I think I used um, just regular salt. That could have been a mistake. Yeah. We need to do more research before we pretend to be experts
so
in this.
y'all will laugh, but I did not get enough somehow of the pickles that I made this year, so I'm growing a very late round of cucumbers just to have some to
Nice.
can up for the rest of the winter. I really want a good batch of homegrown dill pickles. I've got the dill and everything grown specifically for that, so hopefully I can make it.
Good luck.
You can do
I
it.
My second batch of cucumbers fizzled out after just maybe six tiny little cucumbers. The the diseases and the bugs, I made the mistake of planting them in the same exact bed, same spot, and then they just took off and
Yeah, I'm
didn't
I'm
last
hoping
long.
that timing will be all right for that. What was hilarious though is I went out and actually planted seeds for some, and then we got all that rain here last week, and now the bed where I was growing them, naturally quite a few drop and that don't get picked up. And I have so many volunteer cucumber plants. I was like, I didn't even have to plant seeds. I could have just let those go. So I ended up having to remove most of those. But I think if my average frost is somewhere around the second week of November, as long as we don't get some freak early frost, I think I'll be in time.
Yep.
So, who wants to tackle the one that is scariest to me, and that's fermentation?
I First, does anyone have experience with this? Because I do not.
I have made sauerkraut. That's the
Okay.
extent of my experience with fermentation. I've made it a few times. And again, it's one of those things where you just sort of follow the steps to the T. And it seems to turn out really well. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in terms of, just cleaning your cabbage, shredding it up, and then basically just pounding the snot out of it. I have a wooden mallet that we actually use to make Mexican hot chocolate. So I just get it in a big bowl and I get the wooden mallet and I pound the snot out of it until it's kind of got a nice, soft but crispy texture. And then you have to pack it down into a nice clean jar, nice sterile jar. You don't want air pockets is the thing. So you want it to really be compressed down because the air pockets is where things can go wrong. And then the other key is you want it covered so no nasties can get in. You don't want like a bug in your sauerkraut, but you have to
Mhm.
let it burp. So you can get special burping lids. I just use like a nice clean cloth or even like a few layers of paper towel, just so that the fermentation, the gases, have somewhere to go. And then I just kept it on a shelf in my basement. So I didn't keep it on my kitchen counter because I was worried that was going to be a little bit too warm. So it was, kind of a slow fermentation process. And there's usually, kind of a range. There's like, okay, you start checking it at this day and, there's kind of a range of times that it'll be ready because depending on the temperature, it'll ferment a little faster, a little slower. Also kind of depends on how sour you want it to taste too. So that to me, that was the easiest, most accessible way to start. Again, follow a reputable source, use the correct salt. Again, it's non-iodized salt.
Mhm.
And if anything seems off, if it smells off, if you get any, discoloration or anything, just chuck it out. Just don't even bother. Just, start with the next batch. Other than that, I haven't tried any other fermentation. I'd really like to try kimchi. I've known people who have made kimchi at home and it turned out. So that kind of seems like the next progression beyond sauerkraut. So we'll see where
Did
that
you
goes.
make unique sauerkraut or was it regular sauerkraut?
No, I just did totally straightforward. Like I didn't add carrots or anything. It was just like green cabbage, just finely shredded.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I did buy the fermentation kit. I have the stainless steel springs that keep it compressed under the liquid, and I have the burping lid. So I've got what I need. I just gotta give it a try. I said I might do some peppers since I have an abundance of peppers, and that's pretty. Like you said, if those go bad, I had a ton of peppers. They were worth a shot. So I think I'm going to take your advice and just go for it.
Just go for it. Just go for it. Yep. It's kind of the same thing as with canning, right? It feels intimidating the first time you do it because you're not totally sure. But if you follow everything to the T, and nothing, goes off the rails, then you'll gain confidence and then you can try more things.
And that's kind of been the experience with gardening in general, right? All of this, before you do it, you only see pictures or you only see other people doing it. And it seems really intimidating. And it's after you start getting a couple reps under your belt, things become really easy. They become normal part of your life. And so we all have those little hangups where we're kind of intimidated by it at first. And then after, a season or two, you become an expert in it. So that's just where we have to take our own advice and just give it a try.
Yep. Start small. And like you said, if it goes bad, oh, well, I had a ton of peppers anyway, no harm, no foul. I learned something. And that's the biggest thing, right? Is the experience. It's like, if you're gaining that experience, even if, at the end of the day, you do end up having to pitch it or compost, you learn something, right? So you can apply it for next season.
Yep. That's the most important part, is learning, having fun, trying out new things. I think that's why we all do this hobby anyway. It would be much easier just to go to the store and buy sauerkraut than to do all that work. But you can say
it's fun though. You get to like relieve all your tension.
Yes.
Just pound the snot out of your cabbage.
Yeah. All right. So you added dehydrating and freeze drying, which are similar, but I do have a food dehydrator, and I've used it to make food for backpacking because that's one of my other hobbies. But I do not use it like for my food from the garden because throwing it in the freezer is just a lot easier, and the dehydrator does heat up the house too. So, have you used a dehydrator for preserving food, Erin?
So I don't have a dehydrator. That should be on my wish list. What I have done is I've done it in the oven. So I have made dehydrated tomatoes in the oven. So just, slicing them really thin and then putting them on some, parchment or one of those silicone baking mats, putting it in the oven, really low temperature, I think around 150 Fahrenheit-ish.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then you leave the door cracked open and then it takes several hours. So that's where it can be a little bit like when I did that was back when I had an electric oven. In my previous house, I had a gas oven. I was a little bit leery to leave it on, all day or all night, even though it was at low temp. But yeah, especially if you have an electric oven, that can be a great option just to play with. If you're interested, and then if you like the results, then maybe the investment in the dehydrator is worth it.
So I haven't tried either, but there's a recipe that I love with sun-dried tomatoes. And that might be worth it enough for me to try next year.
Yeah, I should really give that a shot. I've never ventured out from just making backpacking food. So,
I mean,
yeah.
it's definitely a lot easier to throw them in the freezer, like
Hmm.
100%. But just for fun, and like Mylan, you were saying, you just get that totally different texture that you can use in different dishes. So it's kind of neat. It's worth trying, at least a few times just to see if it's something you're into.
Yep. You can make like little chips that you can snack on instead of potato chips from a bag.
Yeah.
And then you also mentioned freeze drying, which, forgive me if I'm wrong, like you need a very expensive freeze dryer to do
Yeah,
freeze
and that's why
drying.
I threw it on there because I
And
was just curious.
I've seen it on Gardner Scott, who's a friend of the show. Um, he has a freeze dryer, and I'm always jealous when I see him whip that out. But yeah, no,
That would
haven't
be
taken plunge.
perfect for backpacking. You could make all those like freeze dried meals.
It would, and that stuff's expensive to buy at the store, so like you might
It
actually be
is.
saving some money if you made it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
no, um,
I'm with you. I'm with
but
you on that. I would love to try it. I'm not sure about the upfront cost for me.
mhm,
Like, if over the long term, I would freeze dry enough. Although, like you said, freeze dried food is expensive, so maybe.
mhm.
But yeah,
It
it would
does.
be neat to try.
I think that it preserves more of the flavor than regular dehydrating. Um, but besides that, yeah, it's very similar. Just a lot more expensive to get into.
Okay, so I that's something that is completely new to me, the concept of freeze drying and freeze dryers. So just as we were talking, I did a quick little Google search and y'all, I've got some sticker shot. I was not
Yeah.
prepared.
It's
I
not
was
going on your
not
wish list.
prepared.
Uh,
No, no, not at least I might have to do a little bit more research, but I'm seeing $3,000, $5,000. I was not expecting that at all.
Yeah, that's kind of the realm
yep.
that the limited research that I've seen. It's a few
Wow.
thousand.
Yeah, that's a lot of backpacking trips.
You'd have to freeze dry for your whole neighborhood and charge.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, then you need to find a spot in the house for it, and I don't want to have to store that thing. They look like they're pretty big, so yeah. But hey, if that's in your budget, if you have a lot of stuff in your garden and you really like having it crispy and crunchy, uh, sure, go for it.
But I mean, on the total opposite side, we kind of skip, a method of drying that's even easier than all the above, and that's just letting things dry on their own. So,
Sure.
one thing that I really like to do, and I've already done it this year, is just with like small red hot chilies, just laying them out between some sheets of paper towel, or you can put them, in a paper bag. You just don't want them to get, super direct sunlight. And again, you
Hmm.
don't want a really humid environment. You need, as dry of an environment as possible. And they will dry on their own if you give them enough time. You just need to make sure they are absolutely 100% dry before you store them. Otherwise, it will be mold city. So just be patient, let them fully dry. If there's any that look bad, discard them, and then it's great. Then you have dried chilies.
One
Yeah,
of the things that sorry, Peter, one of
go
the
ahead,
things that
Mylan.
I found I like to use is so the containers that like the cherry tomatoes and sometimes the peppers come from in the grocery store. So they have those slits in them. I will take, just like what you said, take the peppers and a couple layers of paper towels in between each layer of peppers. And I found those to work really well to put on the pantry and kind of speed up the drying process just a little bit.
Very nice. Yeah, so I do the same, but with all like herbs and spices. So like I take the basil and just throw it in a mesh bag and kind of hang it up, and then it dries. No effort. So, and then after a few weeks, it's fine to crunch up and put in a little container.
The mesh bag's a great tip. I'm still in that one.
Yeah. So you can just crush it up in the mesh bag, and I do the same thing. I use these mesh bags. They're bags that I originally bought uh, as an alternative to produce bags. So they're reusable. You can send them through the washing machine, and so I throw all my produce that I grab at the garden in them. And then anytime I also save seeds from like a lettuce plant, I'll just take the whole thing and shake it in the mesh bag, and it's fine enough where it catches all the seeds. So very, very useful. I'll try to find a link and post it. So yeah.
Good deal.
Is there anything else?
So before we go, have either of you ever had a major garden preservation fail?
Does having a harvest basket full of stuff that you 100% intended to preserve and end up leaving on the back deck in full sun that day count?
Yes. Oh no,
that
I've been
that
there.
has happened.
Oh no.
It is amazing how everything looks fine when you harvest it that morning and it's been out in the sun for weeks. But suddenly you take it off the plant and you just so happen to leave it in a basket that morning. And it was some eggplants, and I came back. I don't know. I just sat them down and forgot to bring them in the house with everything else. And I came back a few hours later and they just looked like somebody had taken a laser and just blasted right through them. They looked horrific.
Oh
So
no.
that's my biggest disaster, but nothing actually in the process of preserving.
Been there,
Um,
done that. Yeah, it's shocking, and nobody really likes sun dried lettuce, so that's not a thing.
No.
yeah. So here, let me share. These are the what is it? 5 jars of peppers that I canned up, and then they were too spicy for me to eat any of them. So that's my fail of thinking, oh, maybe it'll get less spicy if I can them up. Nope, not at all.
Were those jalapenos?
They are garden salsa variety of peppers.
Okay.
Mhm.
I
Which
wonder how they do if they, with longer term storage, if they ever mild out any or if they just stay.
it's been about over a year now, and
Oh, wow.
they're still
Okay.
very spicy.
Okay.
I ended up just tossing a bunch of them because I realized, okay, this is just taking up too much space, and I need the jars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how about you,
Oh
Aaron?
man.
What's your fail?
Well, I've definitely left my fair share of stuff out in the sun accidentally. It happens a lot in the market garden because the rows are so long and you pick so many of things and then they hide under the leaves and it's like, oh, that's where that bunch of kale went. Oops. But at home last year, I had a huge glut of banana peppers and maybe a few other spicy peppers, and I just like could not get through them. You know, did salsas, did freeze, like did the whole thing, just could not get through them. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna make a giant batch of pickled peppers, and I'm just gonna like put, whenever I'm making chili or salsa or something, I'll just put a spoon in. That was my grand plan. But my plan was to use a blender. Like I didn't want to slice them all individually. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to like hack the tops off, maybe cut them into 1 or 2 pieces. And then I'll use a hand blender just to kind of like, grind them up and then brine them and it'll be great. And in the process of doing this, my blender just completely bit the dust. It could not handle the giant chunks of peppers that I put in. So it was like smoking and the house smelled terrible. And I was like, okay, I just wrecked a blender in the interest of saving a few dollars worth of peppers.
And
I
pepper
did manage
sprayed
to get
yourself.
them. I switched blenders, so I did manage to get them blended. But it was still such a glut of peppers that to this day I have not made it through these pickled chopped peppers. So yeah, not worth it. Should have just froze them or composted them. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's just not worth it.
and with peppers in particular, you just got to be really careful processing peppers. I've learned the hard way.
Oh, yes, that's a fail.
All right, and with that, let us know in the comments if you're on YouTube or another platform that allows comments. What is your harvesting or preserving fail? How are you a Peter who picked too many pickled peppers and preserved them? Yeah. So, and with that, I think this is the end of the episode. Thank you for listening, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Leave us a review if you can, and we will see you on the next episode.
And send us your questions.
Yes, send us a question at let me look it up. Question@planter.garden. If you have a gardening question for us, any topic, anything related to gardening, we would be happy to answer it on the next episode. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.